Tom Kozlik, the head of Public Policy Municipal Strategy at HilltopSecurities. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for this episode of our Hilltop Talks, Politics and Finance podcast series for 2024. During these Hilltop Talks discussions with subject matter experts, we consider topics that intersect the areas of politics and finance at the federal, state, and local levels in the U.S. We often concentrate on issues related to U.S. public finance and the municipal bond market. This is the third episode we've recorded for 2024. Today, we have with us Chris Iacovella, the CEO of the American Securities Association. Chris is a leading national financial services and policy expert. His opinions are sought after by regulators, Congress, the media, and financial market participants and observers. We're very, very lucky that he's able to take some time today to not only discuss the ins and outs of Washington, but specifically to discuss what he's seeing on the legislative side and how D.C. is approaching this new age of digital and cybersecurity. So, Chris, thank you very much for joining us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here with you again, Tom.
So I'd like to discuss some of the leading topics that I know are going on and are at the forefront of a lot of folks' minds, and what it is that you and the other folks of the ASA are following as the 118th Congress and President Biden's first term kind of winds down. Infrastructure seems to be a timely topic as we're very close to the recent bridge collapse that occurred in Baltimore. And just this week, the president's former chief of staff made, at least to me, some surprising comments where he said that he thinks that the president is out there talking too much about bridges. But that, to me, reinforces the importance of infrastructure. And I'm wondering, Chris, do you think that infrastructure is going to be a talking point or a subject that presidential candidates are going to address leading up to the 2024 election in the way that they did leading up to 2016?
I think that the way that you phrase that question is spot on, because in the way that they did in 2016, no, I do not believe that that's going to be the format with which President Biden and President Trump discuss infrastructure. I think that given the recent events where you have boats crashing into our bridges and things happening in our waterways, I think that you could have a different discussion about infrastructure in this country and whether it's going to be durable enough to stand up to threats and or unconventional type of accidents. And I think that might be a topic that's discussed as people start to realize or if these kind of accidents, quote unquote, continue to happen more and more frequently.
So do you think that, so it almost sounds like what you're saying is that you think that it could be too important of a topic to be discussed over just the next couple of months, that it's going to require a lot more thought and a lot more analysis?
I guess what I'm trying to say is that the infrastructure bill and a vast, sprawling spending bill like we had in the first 2 years of the Biden administration is not on the table. It costs too much, it can't be financed, and it's not something that appeals to the people anymore. It's not going to be front and center. However, to the extent that you continue to have accidents that show how vulnerable our infrastructure is to threat or accident, I think that at that point it's going to force its way into the discussion, especially if we have another problem that happens closer to the time when people are going to start to vote. People care about security, and if they view things as accidents that are happening that are damaging our infrastructure, or if they view things as intentional acts that are designed to harm our infrastructure, I think that's when the infrastructure conversation might pick up. But it's going to be coupled with national security threats, whether our infrastructure is designed to be able to withstand national security threats. And I think that's the kind of discussion you're going to have, not should we have shovel-ready projects and should we funnel
Right.
all kinds of money to green initiatives so that we could sign up voters and things like that, like happened in the last
Right.
bill.
Right. But so tax policy at some point here is going to be an issue, and the American Enterprise Institute 2 or so weeks ago published a policy paper proposing the elimination of the municipal bond tax exemption as a pay for the bigger picture tax policy that it was proposing. What are your thoughts about tax policy shifts generally and that proposal specifically?
We're very worried about that proposal. If you look at our
Mhm.
debt to GDP, it's approaching 130%. That is an enormous number. It's never happened in the history of this country before. And at some point, capital markets participants are going to take some notice of the fact that we are approaching a number like 130% of GDP, but yet we continue to spend without any changes in our fiscal policy. And that's going to cause policymakers to take a look at every deduction: mortgage interest deduction, capital gains deduction, deductions of charitable contributions, capital gains on home sales, and yes, the muni, state, and local bond interest deduction. Exclusion. So a lot of these exclusions help regular people across the country. And this one in particular is a tax incentive that is designed to take money out of the elite coastal areas and send it to places all over the country, in Iowa, in parts of Texas, in Kansas, in North Dakota, South Dakota. People who are institutional investors located in Wall Street and on Wall Street, but for the tax exemption, wouldn't be sending their money to these locations across the country. So this is one example, and it's a glaring one, where you are actually promoting financial inclusion. You are helping diversify investment streams that actually goes from Wall Street to Main Street, and there's a direct line of benefit there. If you remove the interest exemption, then one of two things is going to happen. Either the size of these projects are going to get smaller, or three things. The size of the projects are going to get smaller. The rates are going to go up in order to fund the project. That's going to cause it to get smaller. It becomes more expensive for the people who live and reside in those localities and communities. And then their taxes have to go up. Or that money that is coming from institutions, mutual funds, and other Wall Street investors is just going to stop, because there's no need to be able to diversify your portfolio in the way that people currently do unless the tax exemption stays. And so, we see this as not just a financial fiscal issue. We see this as a social issue that we need to make all policymakers on both sides of the aisle aware of, and also state representatives, state financial officers, and governors in blue and red states, and make them very aware that there is a stream of financing that is going to dry up unless rates go up significantly to attract that investment, and that's going to harm the ability of all of these communities to be able to finance the projects they need to make lives better for their citizens.
I want to follow up on this, because one of the things that you started out by saying is the answer to this question that I'm going to ask you. So to a degree, you're just going to repeat it. But I think it's important. And the reason it's important is because I'm asked this question at almost every meeting that I go to where this comes up. And the question is, there's a statement and a question. The statement is that there's been a quote unquote threat to the municipal tax exemption going back to the 80s and 90s. Why is it different now?
Well, and I think that was the first part of my answer, is that when
Exactly.
you have 130% of debt to GDP ratio, that is going to be a problem. And you know what? It's possible that I'm wrong, and that we play this game where we prolong the market forcing policymakers to pay attention to the fact that the debt level's too high. I don't know exactly what the number is that's going to force the market to pay attention, but at some point it will. It could happen in the first quarter of next year during the funding and the tax debates that are scheduled to come up. And if that happens and we have a bout where short-term debt and the financing of 2, 5, maybe even 7 or 10-year debt, where the market just stands down and lets yields roll up to a level that catches people's attention, I think that's the only thing that's going to get the attention of policymakers to actually start focusing on cutting spending in a meaningful way and reevaluating programs. And there's a lot of spending out there that happened over the course of these last 3 years that can be rolled back and redirected into other areas.
And the longer that interest rates stay relatively higher, that doesn't help things either.
No.
So one of the things that I've been thinking about and contemplating is I've recognized over the last kind of 2 to 3 years how much support there has been for the state and local government tax, the SALT cap, and or kind of dialing that cap back to kind of pre-2017 levels. I was wondering if you think that if there's enough support in Congress to overturn that SALT cap at some point, and where the priority of Congress is if you kind of compare the tax exemption to the SALT cap.
Oh, I think that there's no appetite to overturn the SALT cap. That's a direct subsidy from states that pay taxes to states that that don't. You have a transfer of wealth that's coming from people to subsidize bad policy in blue states where their fiscal house is not in order, and so they continue to justify raising taxes in those states by wanting to spend more and more, and then they complain to the federal government that they need a deduction to help out their taxpayers instead of looking inward at their own fiscal house. So I would be very surprised if that gets overturned. I think the constituency of blue states that are clamoring for that is they're just going to continue to do that to no avail. And I think the evidence to back up my opinion is the fact that we haven't even had that discussion during the course of the Biden administration.
Right. So one of the hot topics in a lot of polls, and one of the things that's driving, I think, a lot of attitudes going into the November 2024 election is what's happening in immigration in cities and states around the country. I'm wondering, is there anything that you're expecting to happen on immigration officially or unofficially kind of leading up to the November elections?
I think the one thing that you're going to start to see on immigration, and it's going to happen across the country, it doesn't matter whether you're in a blue state or a red state, is the pressure that this administration's immigration policy is putting on fiscal budgets. It costs a lot of money to house illegal immigrants. It costs money to try to educate them. It costs money to provide health care to them. These are costs that were not in the budgets of many of these states and localities, and they are causing a fiscal strain, and they're depleting the amount of resources that should otherwise go to legal residents of this country and of each state. And that is something that people are starting to become keenly aware of, whether they're Republican or Democrat. And that's what's going to be part of the immigration debate this time around.
So I'd like to shift the talk to what it is that's been not only happening, but over the last couple of months, the lawmakers in D.C. have been holding hearings related to cybersecurity and the cybersecurity threat I've been writing about this going back to when it is that Russia invaded Ukraine end of last year. There were some cyber attacks on water authorities. And in the beginning of this year, there were several instances where lawmakers in D.C. Started to, really finally, they haven't really done much on this, but they're starting to talk. And as an example, there were some hearings in Congress about from the committee, the CCP, the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party. I was wondering if you could comment on kind of what is it you're seeing in D.C. with regard to this kind of new age of warfare and the cybersecurity threat?
Yeah, and I think we alluded to it a little bit earlier in the conversation, more talking about the barges that hit the bridge in Baltimore. There was another barge that stopped in the Arkansas River. I think you've got a situation here where FBI Director Wray came out and testified and said that the Chinese Communist Party is lying in wait to wreak havoc on our critical infrastructure. He doesn't say that without having some evidence to back up what he's saying. Now, we don't get to see that, though. That's classified, and the people who get access to that information know exactly what justified that conclusion so that the American people could hear it. But when he says that, it gets people's attention. And when you think about critical infrastructure, you think about our communication systems, our waterways, our bridges, our roads, our water treatment plants, our electrical grid, and you also think about our financial system. You could cause a lot of havoc in our financial system by taking down an exchange, interfering with trading, or there's a new thing called the Consolidated Audit Trail that the SEC created that collects all of the personal and financial information of every American investor who owns a share of stock and centralizes it in Washington, D.C. And if a hacker wanted to, they could get all of the information out of there, know what your financial position, know what you own, know your account numbers, and be able to essentially steal your identification and move your money wherever they wanted to. I mean, so there are, and that is a federal government created hazard that I just talked about. The other ones are hazards that are necessary for our commerce and our society to function. So the cybersecurity threat is one that is, a lot of people think that it's part of a World War III scenario that has already begun with the beginning of the Ukraine invasion of Russia, because of all of the cyber interactions that are happening, not just here, but underwater with cable lines, in space. And so I don't know if this is going to be one of the top issues of the presidential campaign, unless there is a problem just before, or sometime this summer or before the election. But, when you take a look at the things that happen with that barge turning off in the Baltimore harbor and then slamming into our infrastructure, effectively shutting down commerce in that area, if that were to happen multiple times in different ports in the United States, that would be a severe hit to the United States economy, because it would have a significant and immediate impact on inflation, which is already something that we haven't been able to tame. So the cybersecurity part is part of a broader warfare that is part of election interference, misinformation in the media, and attacks on our communications and electrical grids that has already been happening by state actors. Mainly folks think it's from Russia and China. It could be from Iran, North Korea as well. But these folks are determined to interfere with the way that we conduct our affairs in this country. And there's an election coming up where it seems to me that there's going to be chaos regardless of who wins the election. And if they can feed off of it or increase the amount of chaos by attacking any one of those areas of infrastructure that we discussed, they can achieve what they want, which is to sow chaos in this country and point to it and say that capitalism is done.
Right. It's these havoc-based attacks are different. This is a different type of cyber threat than the traditional kind of ransomware. You click on a link and you're not going to get your data back unless you pay $100,000, right? What you're talking about, this different cyber threat is it's evolved, or it's much different, and it's interesting. I actually have the quote here in my notes that you're referring to from the FBI director. He said, "China's hackers are positioning on American infrastructure in preparation to wreak havoc and cause real-world harm to American citizens and communities if or when China decides the time has come to strike." Right? That's the statement that you're referring to, right, Chris?
That's exactly the one.
Yeah. That's well, we've got a couple of months until we get to the election. I know that you and I have been talking about doing a pre-election podcast towards the end of the summer. So I'm absolutely looking forward to that. Looking forward to talking more about this to see how things evolve. And with that, I want to thank you for joining us. Chris, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to talking to you in a couple of months as well.
Well, and thank you so much, Tom, for being a leader. And I would be remiss to say that if it wasn't for you, when all of the spending started, bringing to our attention and to the attention of the public that the muni tax exemption was going to be on the chopping block for real this time, I don't think we would have paid as much attention to it. So you deserve some credit for being out front on that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for all of your counsel over the years and months as well. I very much appreciate that. And I want to thank everybody who tuned in and downloaded our recording today. Thank you very much for listening. For those interested, you can see the recent Hilltop Securities Economic and Municipal Commentary and listen to our podcast by going to HilltopSecurities.com/commentary. You can follow me on Twitter or X and LinkedIn. Thanks, everyone. We look forward to bringing you more color in the future related to topics that intersect the world of politics, finance, and U.S. public finance. This has been Tom Kozlik from Hilltop Securities.